Welcome to bilingual e-lectures for diploma students. Today's subject is C programming. We continue the first unit, the program development and introduction to C. In the first lecture, we have seen what is meant by a computer. In this second part, we discuss about the languages we used with the computer and the program development cycle. So, we instruct the computer through a language. So, language is a medium of communication. We use spoken and written languages to communicate with other people. Sign language also used to communicate with the computer. We need some mode of some type of language to instruct. That instruction should be given in a computer understandable language. We understand Tamil or English or Hindi, but the computer cannot understand those natural languages as it is. So, we use a special type of language which is called a computer language. So, the languages used to communicate with the computers are called computer languages. The instructions should be given using these languages. This instruction is a program is a sequence of such instructions written in a computer language to perform a particular task or a process. So, programming is an act of writing a program. Now, we will see what is meant by programming. All the activities which are involved in solving a problem using the computer is called programming. It is a process of designing, writing, testing, debugging and documenting as well as maintaining the program. In a much narrower sense, it is the coding and testing of a program. So, this program development is a systematic way of developing a software. We develop software or a program in a particular using a particular computer language. This is a systematic way to express our ideas, to give instructions to the computer. So, it provides an organized plan for breaking down the task of program development into manageable parts. So, each phase must be successfully completed before moving on to the next phase. So, some parts are repeated. The output of a particular phase will be used as the input for the next phase. So, the programming needs the following steps. The entire steps are called program development cycle. There are three stages in the program development. The initial stage, which involves the problem definition, analyzing the problem and its requirements and designing a method to solve the problem. It is the initial stage. After developing an algorithm or a method, the programmer starts writing a code which is called a coding. It has a debugging and testing and validation, and finally documentation and maintenance. These three major phases will be explained in the coming slides. Many of these tasks are interdependent. That means the initial stage gives the details for the coding or programming stage. After programming and testing, the document or the maintenance instructions are prepared. So, defining the problem, analyzing the problem, and design and representation of algorithms are the initial stage. The analysis and design is a program design. First, defining and understanding the problem. Actually, when we solve a particular kind of problem using a computer, the user or the customer gives a specification, actually what is required or what is his problem. So, the initial defining or understanding the problem stage, it involves expressing and clarifying the exact specification of the problem. Here it is exactly what we are supposed to do. The problem should be clearly defined. So, it states the input specification, which is the data availability, what is available with the problem, and what is required from the solution, that is called the output specification, and the special processing, that means is there any criteria or limitations or conditions in the data or output specifications. These components define the problem. So, after understanding the problem, the programmer or system analyst should analyze the problem and find a solution. This is one of the role of a system analyst, to analyze and define the requirements of software system and the suitable method to solve the problem from the details provided in the problem statement. Analyst or system designer has to develop a step-by-step method of arriving a solution and the overall structure of the problem. As a result of this analysis and design, we get the structure charts or data flow diagrams, flow charts, the documents which define the form of input, the documents which define the form of the output. These are the result of the analysis and design phase. After getting the information from the design, the programmer can start writing a code by deciding the language. So, this is a coding stage. Coding means programming or writing instructions for the computer using any programming language. The programmer translates an algorithm or flowchart into a program using any programming language. These instructions are the actual program. The code must be simple and easy to understand. The next phase is a debugging. In computer terminology, bug means error. So, debug means removing errors or eliminating the errors. So, debugging is the process of identifying and correcting the errors in the program. While compiling a program, there may be some errors which are called as the syntax errors. We will see different types of errors in the next slides. Compilation is a process of translating the program into machine understandable form. So, after successful compilation, the program can be tested on the system. So, the debugging is done after coding. During compilation, the user may get or the programmer get different types of errors. It may produce syntax errors, runtime errors and logic errors. So, these are the three major types of errors while developing a program. Syntax error occurs when there is a violation of rule of a language. These errors are normally easy to correct because the compiler will point out the line numbers where the error occurs, like missing of semicolon or braces or type of a procedure, return type for a procedure, missing or duplicate variables, data type errors, type mismatch on assignment, type mismatch between actual and formal parameters. Actually, these details like parameters we will see in programming, but generally syntax error means language grammatical errors in the structure. So, runtime errors, these types of errors occur during execution of the program. Actually, the program will be successfully compiled, but during execution there may be some errors. Errors such as mismatch of data types or array out of bounds are known as execution error or runtime errors. The execution or runtime errors are not detected by the compiler. So, programs with runtime error will run, but produce erroneous results. The logic error is an error which causes the computer to do something other than intended. These errors must be found and corrected by the programmer. Sometimes this can be time consuming and difficult. These are the errors related with the logic of the program execution. These errors are not detected by the compiler. They are primarily due to the poor understanding of the problem or lack of clarity, such as hierarchy of operators. Such errors cause incorrect results. So, another stage of the program development is testing and validation. So, initially we analyze understand the problem, find an algorithm to solve the problem. Based on the algorithm, the programmer write the instructions or a program and compile it and rectify the syntax errors during compilation. After compiling successfully, it can be executed. During execution also there may be some errors due to some logical problems. So, after rectifying those logical errors, now the program is ready. That means it is perfectly working. But the testing and validation is another level of debugging. That means we test the software for its completeness, whether the program works for all kinds of input data that can be tested on in the testing and validation phase. So, after removal of syntax errors, the program will execute. A program or module is tested by running it with sets of different test data. So, after successful testing and validation, the program can be packaged to the user or given to the user. With the software, we also give the documentation or the manual. For the program also, the document will be useful. So, documenting is preparing a detailed description of the program. This document simplifies the understanding of the purpose of the problem and the program, the logic and data of the program. From the document, anyone can understand the problem and its input and output data formats. There are also two kinds of documents: programmer documentation and user documentation. The programmer documentation provides an overview of the program's functionality and information that will be helpful for the programmers to modify a program. If the program wants to change the program, he has to go through the document and can modify the program. The things that should be included are description of the data structure, flow chart, and the program limitations. The user documentation provides explanations of major features of the program, reference documentation of all program commands, and a thorough description of the error messages generated by the program. User documentation is considered primarily as a user's guide. The things that should be included in the guide are operating procedures, hardware configuration, backup process, what to do in case of errors. Functional description represents the description of the problem it solves, a general description of the method of solution. These are the two types of documents. The final part of the program development cycle is maintenance of the software. So, maintenance is updation when required or modification of the program. After the software is completed, it needs to be maintained and evaluated regularly. During maintenance, the programming team or the programmers fix errors and update the software. For example, in a payroll or income tax calculation, at the end of every year the program needs some corrections or modifications that should be carried out annually. Many software vendors produce updates after some period by fixing some new features and altering the forms. So, in the programming development cycle, we have seen different stages: problem definition, analysis and design of the problem, and the programmer's part, the coding, debugging and testing of the program, and the final stages, documentation and maintenance of the software. All these modules or stages are called program development cycle. Now, for the developing a program, we already saw a computer language is used for communication with the system. We use a computer language to write a program. So, that computer language is classified into different categories based on the levels of difficulties. So, the level of programming languages are discussed now. Programming languages are classified according to a set of characteristics that describe the nature of each language, the purpose of the language and the method of solving problems. So, we classify the languages. So, another type of classification is based on the simplicity. So, low level languages, high level languages, very high level languages. Here the level means the simplicity for the user. So, low level languages, these are a group of languages which are machine or hardware independent, hardware dependent. The low level languages are hardware dependent, that means they depend on the processor, the instructions of the microprocessor used in the system. They are difficult for the programmer to understand but can be directly processed by the system. That means, the low level languages are easier for the machine, difficult for the human. There are two languages which are known as low level languages. One is machine language, another one is assembly language. These two are low level languages which are closer to the system. So, machine language is a language in which the instructions are in the binary form. Actually, the computer can understand only codes in the form of binary numbers. So, all the instructions given to the system must be given as a code, but we cannot write everything in numbers. It is difficult for us. In the initial stage, the programmers write the program in these types of codes. Each operation is represented as a code. The simplified form of binary numbers is hexadecimal, like 3E76 are the instructions in the microprocessor which are given in a hexadecimal format, which denotes some instructions like halt instruction. They can be understood by the machine directly. So, they can be executed directly by the computer. They run very fast. So, low level languages are faster. So, machine language is the binary form language. It is a final instruction for the machine. So, all other languages must be translated into this language. So, these languages are very fast because there is no need to translate the program. So, they can directly execute, but the disadvantage of the machine language is it is difficult for the programmer, and also programmer has to know the hardware, details of the hardware, has to remember lot of codes to write a program. It is difficult to debug the program. So, for writing a program in machine language, the internal architecture and the memory addresses and data formats should be known to the programmer. So, the difficulty is reduced by the scientists, and they developed another language called assembly language. So, this is a simplified form of machine language. Instead of using codes, we can directly use some mnemonics or symbols for representing operations. So, the instructions are 2 or 3 or 4 letter words which represent a specific operation. For example, in microprocessor or microcontroller, we can use assembly language instructions, and we write programs with these type of mnemonics like add, sub, multiply, which is called mul, jump on carry, JC, etc. So, these are the instructions in assembly language. Again, these instructions require the internal architecture of the processor. In assembly language, we use addresses for data storage. So, these instructions also difficult for the programmer. These assembly language programs needs to be translated into machine language. This translation is done by a software called assembler. So, assembler is a software for translating assembly language into machine language. The advantages of assembly language is also it is easy